by then. So,
Except that he is part of it if we can get that in.
well, that's true. That's true. But, well,
I've been slacking with him this morning, so he should be on shortly.
oh, good.
Good.
Good to see you put a shirt on, Rodney. That's good.
I can,
Y'all should find
Yeah.
on YouTube.
that's okay.
It won't be on long.
Well, will you keep it on during this, during our meeting, I hope, right?
But yeah.
All right.
Hey, Jerry, can you check the YouTube, please?
Hey, look who we got here. Look who we got here.
Yeah, I can do
Mr.
that. I just
Meckler.
got on.
Good morning, all.
Morning.
Hi, Mark.
Morning,
Thank
Mark.
you. Thank you, man. Thank you for joining us today.
Of course, glad to be with you guys.
What are you 2 hours behind us?
1 hour.
Just 1 hour? Okay. Okay, good. Mark, while I got
Still breakfast time in Central.
huh?
I said it's still breakfast time in Central Time as far as I'm concerned. Go ahead.
Mark, when I introduce you, I want to make sure I've got all your positions correct, past and present. Can I go through the list real quick with you?
You know, it's really not necessary. It's like all the stuff, it's not necessary. If you just introduce me as president of Convention of States, that's great.
Oh, you just want, okay.
That's all, yeah.
Well, I did want one other thing that I did want to clear with you. I know you're an attorney, right?
Yep.
And I wanted to mention that we're aware that as a young law student, that at one time you had a mohawk haircut and it was dyed blue.
That is true. Absolutely factual.
Do you mind if I mention that?
No, not at all. I'm quite proud of it, to my wife's chagrin.
I just, ever since you said that, that has stuck in my mind, and I wanted to take this opportunity to.
I wish there were photos. There are actually no photos that I've been able
Well, that was going to be my next question. Really? There are no photos of that?
No photos that I've been able to look at. I was never a big photo guy. I remember nothing digital back then, so just don't have any.
Well, maybe Lucy or someone could Photoshop something.
I like that idea.
Well, good. Well, thank you again, Mark, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. You've been through these, I know, so you pretty much know what we're going to be doing. And when, of course, you're the featured speaker. It's not like there's nothing going on. There's plenty to talk about, I'm sure. Self-governance, of course, is a big thing for us that we're really pushing here in Indiana. So, and of course, open the states so I'm sure you've got a lot you can say about in that area.
Is there anything in particular, Dale, that's going on in Indiana that you want me to tie into or elevate?
Well, I think opening the state is probably the big item. Paul, would you agree with that legislatively, or?
Yes, I would. We're moving ahead, but not quite as fast enough for most people's tastes. The joke is we hope that we're completely open by July 4th so we can celebrate our freedom.
Now, where are you guys at? Do you have like our hair salons open or our bars open, gyms? Where are you guys at?
I think restaurants are at 75% now.
Yeah, something like that. It's
Salons are open, but you know, wearing masks and all the PPE and that kind of stuff.
Maybe appointment only.
And then of course the big, you know, sports venues aren't open yet. And churches technically are open, but in a practical sense, they're not, because if you have to comply with all the regulations, it's pretty impossible to really hold a church service.
Okay.
yeah, they're really cautiously approaching opening the churches. The state fair has been canceled. A lot of county fairs have already been canceled.
A lot of concerts have been canceled.
The what?
A lot of concerts have been canceled.
Yeah.
Gun shows.
Yes. So we're opening, but it's at a very cautious pace.
By the way, I don't know if you guys have seen this. This is a book that's coming out. Alex Berenson is a former New York Times reporter, investigative reporter for over 10 years at the Times. He's been one of the big critics of the lockdown, and he's releasing this book in pamphlets because he wanted to get it out there as quickly as possible. And it's the best documentation I've seen about what a scam this is. And he's not from the right. This is not some right winger writing about what a scam all this has been. He is a New York Times investigative reporter, and he's just furious at the New York Times, his former newspaper, and how the mainstream media has just refused to ask any questions about why so many severe mistakes were made in projections and in the lockdowns. You know, there are full studies. A German organization did a study and found out there's been actually zero positive effect from the lockdowns. It hasn't changed. There's zero difference between the countries that have locked down and not locked down, states that have locked down versus not locked down. And that's not reported in the media at all. So Berenson's doing a great job. You can order that on Amazon. I just got it. The first booklet, I'm in the midst of it, is about, let's see, it's like 40 pages or something like that. It's very, very small. But he's going to release it chapter by chapter like this because he wants it to remain timely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Is the Indiana legislature, are you guys doing anything to kind of limit what the governor can do during a situation like this? Thought I'd heard that.
I would say it's our hope to do that. We had 4 representatives write a letter to the governor early on, and I tried to make contact to all 4 of them. You know, ask them, what are you going to do about it? Is there some legislation you're going to carry forward that we could help with? And haven't heard back from any of them, but I'll keep pressing. But that's kind of where we're at.
You know, we've been one of the legislators that signed off on that letter is one of our local legislators in a local district where Paul and I live here. Been trying to get him to come on to my Facebook Live broadcast that I do every Monday evening, but I don't know. You know, ever since this virus hit and the lockdown, can't communicate with them at all. It doesn't seem anymore. They're just not responding at all.
So your legislature is pretty much abdicated. They've just disappeared from the scene.
Yeah,
Pretty much.
They finished the session before COVID hit. They actually gavelled out, I think 4 days early because the Big Ten basketball tournament was scheduled in Indy and no hotel rooms and all that. Right. So they decided to get out of town early, or probably their intent was to attend the games. Yeah. But and then it was shortly after that you know, all that was canceled and the COVID hit. So they got out of town before everything hit and ducked all kinds of responsibility.
And what do people generally feel about the governor at this point?
That's a good question.
I've seen polling that he's doing, you know, over 50% somewhere, maybe 60, but there's a lot of unhappiness about all the shutdowns, and they still haven't opened up on that too. So
he'll probably get reelected, but I think he's perceived more as a rhino. Right. You know, he was a last minute fill-in when Governor Pence, you know, jumped onto the national ticket with Donald Trump, and they flipped mid-campaign. And this is his first political position, I believe, elected political position.
Except not elected, but well, I guess he was elected, but still he was the fill-in.
It looks like, so he was lieutenant governor first?
Yes.
Hey, Mark, this is Rick Lyon. I just want to let you know that we are streaming live on YouTube at the moment, and I'll be the one helping feed questions to you later. So.
Okay, sounds great.
By the way, that is up. I checked it. I just didn't have a chance to get back with you.
Good. Excellent.
Also, Mark, I wanted to ask you, the last segment of our agenda today is we're going to present 2 challenge coins.
Right.
So I know that award is very important to you. So want you to feel free to at the start of that to make any comment. Well, we'd appreciate it if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. What I like to do, I generally like you guys to award the coins themselves,
Right.
because the folks getting the coins. What I like to do is talk about why it's so important.
Right, exactly. Okay, very good, very good. All righty. Any other questions or anything anybody have that we need to talk about before we start this? Now, as when we get into the Q&A, oh, I know what I wanted to mention to you, Mark. Do you have some thoughts that you want to share with us on what's going on in Seattle?
Oh yeah, sure, I can do that.
Okay.
Since
Not much happening there at all, but you know.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, Seattle is the ultimate in self-governance. I actually am in full support of the protesters there in Seattle. I mean that only partially facetiously, which is that if that's what Seattle wants, if they really want their city to descend into chaos and destruction and anarchy, they're entitled to that. And if you watch what's happening, their legislature is apparently okay with it. Their city council is apparently okay with it. Their mayor is apparently okay with it. Governor Jay Inslee, when asked about it, said he didn't know it was even happening. So he's obviously comatose or something. And so really, and I'm actually quite enjoying it. The irony of it is rich. In fact, I actually think the left has lost its ability to even understand or recognize irony. You have a self-governing zone now, an autonomous zone, which has allegedly seceded from the United States of America. And of course, they're leftists and they hate everything that has to do with guns, so they're heavily armed. They don't like borders, so they built a border wall. They hate police, so they immediately set up a police force. They are opposed to police brutality, so they're threatening to blow people's brains out if they don't do what they want them to do. They are obviously opposed to any kind of sexual harassment or sexual violence. There are lots of reports now of rape and sexual harassment going on inside the zone.
Oh, really?
And they seemingly are unable to feed themselves because they put out a call for people to deliver vegan meat substitutes. So pretty much they've checked off everything on the list you could possibly check off. It's actually quite amusing to watch.
Yeah, I listened to your podcast on that, Anarchy in America, this morning. Pretty good.
Thank you. Appreciate that you guys are listening.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, all right. Do you think there's going to be my wife and I were talking about the Seattle thing. Do you think there's going to be some lawsuits or some legal action come out of what's happening there?
I think there should be. If I was a resident of that area, the Capitol Hill area, I'd be pretty upset, watching our businesses be destroyed. There's a whole bunch of businesses in that area. There were 500 residences in that area.
Yeah, I heard the report there were residences there. So
yeah, over 500. So I think we would have to call back. But having also watched the reporting very closely, I think the majority of the residences are actually in support of what's going on right now. It's a pretty radical area. That is, I have a neighbor who is from Seattle who I was talking to yesterday. I'm not as familiar with the geography as he is, but he asked, do you have any idea why it's taking place there? And I said, no. And he said, me either, but that is virtually a 100% gay area. It's the gay area of Seattle. And so I think you've got an area which has endemic radical leftist politics. And you've got this intersectionality where one leftist group is required to support another leftist group. So you're not really seeing much blowback from the residents. And that to me is hard to imagine, so I don't think you're going to see that kind of litigation.
Dale, we're 14 minutes out, so just so you know.
The one question I got on that is, in the Constitution, it says the federal government shall ensure that the states have a Republican form of government, and that's not Republican, it's anarchy.
Yeah, and I would actually, Jerry, I would go one step further than that, and I find this really interesting, is they have seceded from the United States of America. That's not allowed by the Constitution. In fact, they've now committed treason, and anybody who is there has committed treason, fomented an insurrection and committed treason. And I would argue, I'm not saying we should do this, but I would argue that the death penalty is available for anybody and everybody that's in there and supporting that, especially the leaders. This guy Raz Simone, who is a rapper walking around with an AR or something. These guys are leading a violent insurrection against the authority of the United States of America. They should be imprisoned for treason. I don't have any expectation that that will happen whatsoever, because remember, you always have prosecutorial discretion, and the prosecutors in that area are as radical as the protesters, are pretty close to it.
You know, the whole state, that is, not just that area, but the whole state really hasn't spoken. They haven't had an election since this. So those people are in office, but they may not be the next time.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, and another really interesting factor to me in all of this, and all of these protests, and actually for me, the most interesting factor in all of it is that mostly these things are taking place in cities governed by Democrats, fairly radical Democrats, fairly leftist, very leftist cities all across the country, cities that have primarily been leftist for decades. In the case of Minneapolis, 47 years since a Republican has been elected as the governor of, or the mayor of Minneapolis, I should say, 47 years. So if you have a police department that's endemically racist, it's run by the mayor, it's run by the city council, and they've all been Democrats, then Democrats are racist. I mean, that's just straight up, it's just a fact. It's not even, you can't even question that fact if you believe in reality. So all these cities, Chicago, Boston, Philly, New York, Atlanta, all these places where these great protests, Seattle, Portland, all run by Democrats, all apparently racist hellholes. Seems like somebody ought to think about throwing the Democrats out of office, because we don't really tolerate racists in this country.
Do you think the president has the right and the responsibility and obligation to send the military in to clear that out?
Yeah, I do. I mean, clearly under the Insurrection Act, he has the right. Whether it's politically appropriate, I would argue it's not under the circumstances.
Oh, you know, he would be raked over the coals. They just and hope somebody would get killed, or somebody would get and caught on video, you know, and he would just be. So
Yeah, he would get eviscerated over it. And honestly, I really, because I believe so strongly in self-governance, I really think if this is the way they want it to be. Now, I would feel differently if there was a mass outcry coming from Washington State saying, please save us, you know, save our city, save our state. Then having the federal government intervene via the military, I think, would be appropriate. But it seems like, for the most part, folks in Seattle support what's going on there. I'm not hearing any outcry. We're not seeing any counter protests. It would be very easy for people to organize a counter protest, you know, tens of thousands of people showing up outside this encampment. It wouldn't be dangerous. It would be appropriate. But I don't think people in Seattle feel that way. And so I think it would be inappropriate for the federal government to intervene at this point.
Okay.
We have a friend that lives in Seattle, and we were asking him about how things were going, and I love the man dearly, but he's a very liberal person, and he was telling us that armed civilians were protecting the police station.
Yeah, that's a nice perspective.
Yeah.
And of course, stealing everything in it.
Yeah.
Guns and whatever.
So, I mean, the good news is for us is most Americans don't believe in what's going on there, and it creates an appropriate narrative for people who believe in law and order. You know, and there's a major caveat I want to give you is I think our justice system is terribly, terribly broken. I don't believe we have a justice system anymore. I've been subjected to it. I think we have an injustice system. I think that it's broken really at its core. The ideals exist, in execution they're terrible. I'll give you just one example, and I'm seeing this all over the country. I've experienced it personally, which is the idea of overcharging suspects, which is endemic to our system now, is a fundamental wrong. In other words, I talked to somebody I interviewed for the podcast yesterday, I think it'll be up tomorrow, and she's a Florida Open the States protester. She was on the beach holding up a sign that said, I am free. On the other side, it had the First Amendment. They arrested her, they threw her in jail. She spent the night in jail. Meanwhile, they're releasing violent felons from Miami jails, but she spent the night in jail, a homeschool mother of 4. They charged her with resisting arrest. All right, now, resisting arrest is a much more serious charge than the underlying charge, which was a misdemeanor. But they overcharged her. She didn't resist arrest. There's videotape of all of it. There's not a single shred of evidence. There's nothing in the police report that indicates she resisted arrest, but they charge for resisting arrest because that allows them to impose scarier penalties on people so that they plead to something else. And you guys might not be aware of this. You might. I got arrested on a gun charge in New York City 9 years ago, I guess it was. Completely unconstitutional in my opinion. But what they put on me after the fact, when they found out who I was a charge of intent to do harm, which carried a minimum of 15 years on Rikers Island. Okay, so I ended up pleading to disturbing the peace because the president of the NRA told me they couldn't protect me, and there was a good chance I was going to spend 15 years on Rikers Island. And so I've lived under this regime. I've been subject to it as a middle-class white guy with connections. Now imagine you are a poor person of color in the inner city, and the same exact thing is done to them every single time somebody's charged. How do you deal with that? What do they do? They've got some public defender that's going to tell them, yeah, take the plea or you're going to go to jail. They can't afford a lawyer. The public defenders are overwhelmed. The system is not just. And I think one of the things that we have to be very careful about as we go through all these protests is to understand and be empathetic that what's going on out there is bad. What you see in the Mueller case is exactly the same, and I mean exactly, as what happens to poor Black people and Hispanic people in the inner cities, poor white people all over the country when they're subject to law enforcement. It is corrupt. Not every cop is corrupt, but the system itself is not just any longer. And that's something I think we got to pay attention to.
7 minutes.
Okay.
Do you? Oh, I'm sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I was just going to ask. Do you think that the legislation that Rand Paul has recently, introduced as far as the no-knock search warrant? There was an incident in Louisville where seemingly, I don't know the entire story, but she was. They found no narcotics, but they went in. They basically shot her 8 times. And he's trying to put a stop to that. Do you see that being an effort that's going to be, put forth more commonly?
Well, it should be. I know there in Kentucky, your governor just signed Breonna Taylor's law, which prevents no-knock warrants from taking place there. That case is actually much worse than you described it. Not only was she unarmed, here's the brief story if you guys don't know. Breonna Taylor was an EMT, I believe. She was an outstanding citizen, just no criminal record, good person, doing the right thing. And there was a no-knock warrant served on her apartment where she and her boyfriend were sleeping. They busted down the door. Her boyfriend came out with a gun and started shooting. And the police officers shot just basically randomly 8 bullets in her body while she was laying in her bed, killed her. He was amazingly not killed. And here's the worst part about the story. They were seeking a suspect on a drug warrant. That suspect was in their custody in their jail at the time of breaking down Breonna Taylor's door.
My gosh.
Yeah. So, I mean, the level of incompetence is extraordinary. And these stories are all across the country of these no-knock warrants going badly. And so I do think we need to do away with that kind of warrant. It should not be allowed. It's just if there's even one of these that takes place, it's not okay.
Yeah, I think it's inherently unconstitutional to start with. And then to top it off for, Breonna Taylor's, the instance where the police actually fudged the report and said that there was no forced entry and she was not injured.
Right. So I think we got about 4.5 minutes to go here, but I would close with this on this subject. I think it's really important that we as thinking people are able to parse what's going on in this country in a sophisticated way. And what I mean by that is we have to be able to say, is there racism in this country? Of course, there is racism in this country. Are we opposed to that? Of course we are. Is the justice system fair? No, it's not. I think it's unjust. And I think reforms are called for. And I think that anytime we see it, we should call it out. What we should be parsing is just simply, look, we don't believe in violence. We don't believe in looting. And I don't believe that the country is systemically racist. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't take the opportunity to address injustice and to work with people that are interested in doing so. And both sides need to cool the rhetoric and be able to listen to each other. I think that's a really big deal.
All right, Dale, we're at 4 minutes. I'm going to start the recording, the Zoom recording.
Okay.
All right.
Mark, what do you think could be done about the qualified immunity doctrine?
Yeah, I think we have a problem with it. I'm not in favor of qualified immunity. That doctrine was invented by the United States Supreme Court. It was not something that's in the Constitution. And so I think we need to do away with it. I think we could do away with it via a convention of states, actually. I'm just not a fan. And there are other ways to deal with it. I think the downside of doing away with qualified immunity is that what do you do as a police officer? You get sued every single day. Every time that you deal with a suspect, you're going to get sued. And there are ways to deal with that in professions that have high liability risks. We have malpractice insurance. You could have police officers have their police departments have malpractice insurance policies for them so that they're covered by lawyers, so that the legal fees are covered and all that stuff. And there's a lot of nuance in there that we would have to shave out of that, Gary. But I think that's a way to deal with it. It's much better than qualified immunity. I'm not a fan of that.
Okay, guys, we're getting close to the 10 o'clock hour here. Now, Mark, you live in Houston now, right?
Just outside of Austin, actually.
Austin. Okay, never mind then. Never mind. You got to remember now we're in Indiana, and hopefully you're not becoming a Houston Texan fan.
No, definitely.
NFL fan yet? Okay. So that wouldn't go over good here in cold country. Okay, just so you know.
A football, man, it's dangerous stuff. Here inside of Texas, you got to be careful what college you choose. You can get in big trouble. UT, AT&T, or AT.
When the NFL starts up again, are they going to do kneeling? I think they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So, which means I just won't be watching.
Yeah, I know. We're going to go through this whole thing again.
Yep.
Oh,
they're going to destroy their brand. That's what they're going to do. Look, did you guys see that there was this watch company that came out with a pro police ad a couple of days ago, Elgard watches?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, I've seen.
So we're going to start to see the country divided that way. By the way, I went online, I bought a watch from just I bought two. I bought one for myself and my daughter, simply to support somebody that was willing to speak the truth, that wouldn't take a knee to the woke mob.
Boy.
I might buy a watch and I don't wear one.
Yeah, I mean, I wear like I don't know what this is, like a Casio or something, cheap watches. And so I did buy their cheapest watch, I have to admit, because I'm not, but I wanted to buy them just to support somebody standing up for what was right.
Yeah, it's, I think NASCAR is going to hurt too. I think they're going to feel the results of this. I hope they do at least.
30 seconds, Dale, if you want to start at 10.
30 seconds?
Yeah.
All right, guys, you're going to mute everybody, Rick?
Yes, I will.
Let's do
You'll
it.
have to unmute yourself.
I'm going to try to leave Mark and Dale unmuted here, so I'll see how I can.
Yeah, I'll just mute myself.
Okay. Okay, here we go.
Hello and welcome to our Indiana Leadership Summit. My name is Marengo Mike. I'm a Hoosier grassroots activist, and as you can see, I've been practicing my safety precautions. But it's time to open our country. So, one moment please. I'm so excited. Today we have a very special guest. The President of Convention of States Action, Mark Meckler, is our featured speaker. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over to our State Director and host, Dale Parrish. Take it away, Dale.
Well, welcome everyone. Welcome all Hoosier patriots and guests. My name is Dale Parrish. I am the State Director for Convention of States here in Indiana. And I want to welcome you to our Indiana Convention of States Leadership Summit for 2020. Now, before we go any further, let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. So, Rick.
Oops. Got the wrong one. Hang on a second. All right, give me just a second. Sorry, I messed that up.
That's okay. This was a last minute ad, so bear with us here, folks.
Okay, now we should get it.
The flag of the United States of America and the republic for which it stands, one nation,
Under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Well, thank you, Ray. As I said, that was a last minute ad, so we'll work on that for the next time. So thanks, Rick. But I want to thank Maringo Mike. You saw Maringo Mike in our introduction. Maringo Mike is a character that was has been created here in Indiana by our state communications coordinator, Ken Kashuba. And we love using Maringo Mike wherever we can. We utilize him to introduce our Convention of States Facebook Live broadcast that occurs every Monday evening at 7 o'clock here in Indiana on our state Facebook page, Convention of States Indiana. So you want to be sure and tune in to that broadcast. We also are using Maringo Mike to introduce or to contribute to our state newsletter, which will be going out next week, as a matter of fact. So you'll want to see Maringo Mike in our state newsletter. Now, I just also want to remind everyone that the summit is being recorded, and it is also being streamed live on our YouTube channel, COS Indiana. So for those of you that are not participants in our summit, you'll be able to view the summit live through our YouTube channel, COS Indiana. Now, let me brief you just on the segments of our summit this morning. It's basically broken down into 3 segments. The first segment will be our featured speaker, and we are very honored to have Mark Meckler with us today. We'll be bringing Mark on. I'll be introducing him very shortly. And Mark will share his thoughts with us. He's already told us that he really doesn't have much on his mind. You know, there's just not much going on in our country right now. So, but no, Mark's got a lot of things on his mind, believe me. And Mark will be sharing his thoughts with us very shortly. Following Mark's segment, we'll entertain a Q&A, a question and answer period, where participants in our summit this morning will be able to ask questions or make comments. Also, if you are viewing if you are streaming this, you can also submit questions, and those will be then monitored by another individual that will be taking care of that particular area. So following the Q&A, the last segment of our summit this morning will involve an awards presentation. We have 2 individuals that we're going to recognize with Challenge Coin Awards, and you'll hear more about these as we get to that segment and brief everybody as to the importance of this award. And so, without further ado, I want to bring on Mark Meckler. And is Mark unmuted? Not yet. There we go. Hi, Mark.
Good morning.
Thank you, Mark, for joining us. Now, I had a long list of positions that I was going to acknowledge that Mark holds, and he's convinced me to not go through that list. We just don't have time, quite honestly. The list is so long. But the only position that he wanted me to mention was that he is president of Convention of States. So, we're thankful for that. We all think very highly of Mark. But I did clear this with him. I wanted to point out one other thing, that as you know, Mark is an attorney, and I want you all to kind of visualize this as Mark as a young law student. Now, this is a true story, folks, with a mohawk haircut and his hair dyed blue. Now, he is nodding. That is a true story. And I heard him say that some years ago on a presentation, and that has stuck in my mind ever since. So I wanted to take this opportunity to mention it. He claims there are no pictures of that exist of that. I find that hard to believe, but maybe his daughter or someone will Photoshop something that will give us an idea what that looked like. But anyway, all in fun. So Mark, thank you once again for joining us today. And so Mark, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And that is a true story, by the way, about the mohawk. And it's not the only time, Dale. So I had a mohawk in law school. Here's how the story goes, so you know how it happened. When I was in law school and I showed up at law school, I've always been kind of a rebel. You guys might be surprised to hear that. And when I showed up at law school, it's a very conformist place. And you have a bunch of people that aspire to be lawyers, and they're trying to dress like lawyers, at least back then, it's a long time ago, look like lawyers, act like lawyers. And as a nonconformist, it was just a terrible environment for me. I just didn't like it. And about 3 weeks into law school, I was living in downtown Sacramento or midtown Sacramento, went to McGeorge School of Law. Anthony Kennedy, by the way, was a teacher at the school. And so I was there, and I found myself just frustrated by all the conformity. So I went down to the local punk rock barber and asked for a blue mohawk. It's worse than it sounds, to be honest with you, because what I had done was the sides were not quite shaved. I had them dyed white, and the mohawk was blue. It was terrible. And I did have a studded dog collar to go with it. And that's how I showed up for school. So everybody, you can imagine everybody else in sport coats and business attire, and I've got a mohawk. And what happened out of it is a very interesting social experiment, which is about half of my professors would no longer look at me. And we sat in these Socratic method style classrooms, theater style classrooms. And so I would sit off to the side, and about half the professors would just never look to that side of the classroom because they just couldn't take it. The other half of the professors basically just pretended it didn't happen. And my favorite professor, who was a property professor, real property professor, walked up to me one day in the hallway and said this. He said, "Mr. Meckler, what's with your hair?" And I said, "Well, Professor, really, it's just I like to mess with people's heads." And he looked at me very seriously from behind his horn rim glasses and said, "I like it," and just turned around and walked away. And so he was always a big fan, and I was a big fan of his. But I've just always been a rebel. I had one other mohawk in my lifetime, by the way, and this speaks highly, or I don't know, maybe lowly, of my wife, depending on what you think of the story. But we had been dating for a bit, and I was in between jobs as a lawyer. So I was already out of law school. I'd already been practicing law, and I was living in a loft building, like an artist loft building, again, part of my rebel past. And I got asked, I was in between jobs. I knew I had my next job. I had left one job, and I asked Patty one night, "What would you think if I got a mohawk?" And she's a very conservative businesswoman type. And she said, "Would it make you happy?" Terrible mistake to ask me. And I said, "Yes, of course it would." And she said, "I guess I'd be fine with it then." And so I immediately went downstairs and had my second mohawk, which she hated, rightly so, but she was tolerant enough. And I have to tell you, people ask me, do I still have that dog collar that I used to wear? And the answer is I do still have it, but as part of a marital settlement, I'm not allowed to take it out or show it in public. So you'll never get to see it, but I've got it. Okay, so I tell you all that stuff by way of background is I am a rebel. I mean, this is just my nature. And I actually think this is in the nature of America. The idea that we can do what we want, when we want, and where we want is baked into the DNA of the United States of America. This is part of self-governance. You hear me talk about self-governance all the time. The fundamental question in America is who decides? Do we get to decide for ourselves, or do politicians far away decide for us? And you know what my answer is? And I think it's the answer of the founders. Who decides? The answer was we, the people, decide. Not a government far away, not a theocracy, not a president, not a Congress, not your mayor. Supposedly you decide for yourself. I decide for myself, my family, and that extends out throughout our system of governance. And what I mean by that is self-governance begins at home with me taking responsibility for myself, my family, but it doesn't end there. I think sometimes, if you're an anarchist, that's where you end it. It's just me for myself. And we're seeing plenty of that today. But self-governance really means that we take responsibility for our communities as well. So it's myself, it's my family by extension, it's out into my faith community, my church, my temple, synagogue, mosque, whatever you attend. It's by extension out into our cities, our schools, our local fraternal organizations. That's us taking self-governance. That's us saying we are ultimately responsible for what happens not only to ourselves and our families, but out into broader society. And self-governance rises all the way to the level of the federal government. The question is, are we going to be engaged in deciding what happens there? Or are we going to let somebody else decide? And I think one of the things that we've seen over our country's history that's a real problem for us is a societal drift away from the idea of self-governance. A long-term, sometimes slow societal drift. We've had it in jerks and starts, and sometimes it's been really bad and dramatic, but mostly just this long-term drift. And you've all heard of the proverbial frog in the pot of boiling water. If you boil it slowly, you can boil the frog to death. If you boil it fast, the frog jumps out. And this has been mostly a slow rise to a boil as we move away from the idea of self-governance. When we think about the American Revolution and what was going on at the time of the American Revolution and compared to what's going on now in American society, what were they reacting to versus what we were reacting to? It's really profound, the comparison. And it's profound for a couple of reasons. I think one is it's profound how distinct it is. In other words, the tyranny that the colonists were feeling, the oppressions, as they called them, were so much milder than the oppressions under which we live today. Remember, there's no income tax. Virtually, the Crown has imposed almost no control on the colonies. They imposed the Stamp Act on the colonies, which was then repealed by the time of the Revolution. They imposed the tea tax on the colonies, which by then had been lowered so much by the time of the Revolution that the price of tea was lower than any time in recent history by the time of the American Revolution. But the thing that actually caused the American Revolution, the actual turning point event, was something called the Declaratory Act. If you go back and read your history, what you'll find, by the way, is very little teaching on the Declaratory Act in American history classes when I was in public school or in public schools today. The Declaratory Act was a very simple act that actually did nothing. Nothing. It had no practical effect on the colonists. It didn't impose a tax. It didn't impose any regulations, no restrictions, nothing. It didn't do anything to trade, but it was a statement of principle. And it was an anti-self-governance statement. It was the ultimate anti-self-governance statement. What the Declaratory Act essentially said, just in layman's terms, was the Crown and Parliament could do anything they wanted to the colonists, and the colonists had no choice or say in the matter. And what does that actually mean in just common parlance? What it means is you're a slave. You're not a free person any longer. You're not free men and women who decide what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. You have subjected yourself to the authority of a power far away. That's what the colonists were actually reacting to. Sam Adams, who I describe as the great narrator of the American Revolution, saw that moment in history and said, this is the line. We cannot allow them to cross this line. If we do this, this is the line between liberty and tyranny. And we can't let that stand. And this is really what ultimately fomented the American Revolution. This idea, just an idea, that the British could do whatever they wanted to the colonists. This is what made the colonists begin to think of themselves as Americans. Until that time, essentially, the colonists were British subjects and they saw themselves as such. Here's another thing that I think is an important comparison with the American Revolution. When you read the writings of the pamphleteers, the real people in the American Revolution are actually fighting and fomenting the American Revolution. And by the way, there were pamphleteers in Great Britain at the time as well. You would find some interesting language in the pamphlets that will probably surprise you. But because I think of the American Revolution, before I understood this, I thought of the Revolution as a time when the Americans were simply throwing off tyranny. They hated the British system of governance. They thought it was inappropriate. They thought it was unfair, inequitable, right? Imposing tyranny on them. So they wanted to throw all that off and form a new system of government. That's my view, or was my view, of the American Revolution. But this is a phrase you will find in the pamphlets of the time from the American Revolution. And by the way, you will find it in the pamphlets of the British writing in England, in London, as well as in the pamphlets in the colonies. And it's this language. It says that the British form of government is the finest form of government ever instituted among men for the preservation of liberty. Okay, I want you to think about it. These are people fomenting a revolution, and they're saying about the system of governance that they're throwing off, that it is the finest system of governance ever instituted among men for the preservation of liberty. That doesn't sound like people who want a revolution. It doesn't sound like people who feel like they don't have self-governance. It doesn't sound like people who are upset with the system of governance under which they're living. And so what's the problem? Why would you have a revolution if you believe you already live under the finest system of governance ever invented for the preservation of liberty? You have to read further in the pamphlets. And what you will find usually following that language in these pamphlets is language similar to this. It says, however, at the current time, we live under a system where all three branches of government have become corrupt and are acting as one against the interests of the people. Now, when I first read that, I'm going to be honest with you, and I still do actually, I'm getting chills right now. That gives me chills. All three branches of government have become corrupt and are acting in concert against the interests of the people. To me, that sounds like today. That's what we say today, right? The courts inventing laws, acting against the interests of the people, not just interpreting laws, not just determining whether laws are constitutional or not, but actually rewriting laws against the interests of the people. This is what the government is doing today. So the courts acting in concurrence with the legislature and the executive trading powers, right? Allowing the other to do more than they were ever intended to do. And all three acting together, especially in Washington, D.C., especially at the federal level, against the interest of the people. And I think this parallel is very important. And the reason I say it's so important is because we live in a time where we don't believe that our system of governance is bad. In fact, I think we can make the exact same argument, which is that we live under the finest system ever instituted for the preservation of liberty. I think it's unequivocal. I don't think that's even arguable. It's inarguable. This is the finest system of governance ever designed by man for the preservation of liberty. However, we live in this system in a time when the branches of government are conspiring against the interests of the American people. In modern parlance, we might call that the deep state, right? We see law enforcement at the very highest level in the United States of America acting against the interests of the people. We see the Mueller probe, a completely fabricated, to use the president's term, a witch hunt or a hoax, designed to undermine justice, to undermine a duly elected president, to prevent somebody from becoming president. We see a previous administration using law enforcement for their own political ends. We have a system that has now been corrupted by people from within the system acting against the interests of the people. And as we look at what's going on in the streets across the country, I think this is very important and very nuanced. And I want you, when you look at what's going on in cities all across the country, whether you're looking at Chaz, the new free country, allegedly free zone in Seattle, or you're looking at protests, whether they're in Detroit or whether they're in Washington, D.C. or New York, it's important that we, as thinking people, are able to look at this and analyze it in a nuanced way. to use our critical thinking. I see too many conservatives and libertarians who just snap to judgments and say things that, in my opinion, are not correct because they're not thoughtful. And here's what I mean by that. If you don't like what you see in that Mueller probe, and I assume you don't, if you don't like that kind of perversion of justice, you need to understand that that's going on in the inner city every day. Really, that exact same thing. Where justice is being perverted against people who cannot defend themselves, this actually happens every day. I'm going to give you the quintessential example of it. If you don't know this, you can go look it up. And I'm not trying to tell you, I would never hide this. I was arrested on gun charges in New York City about 9 years ago. And I was traveling with a firearm. I always travel with a firearm to the extent I can carry it interstate because I get death threats. And back then I was getting a lot of death threats. And I got arrested leaving New York City, charged with a gun crime. It's unconstitutional. It's inappropriate. Ultimately, I had to plead down to an infraction to get out of it. It cost me about $50,000 of my own money in attorney's fees. But the bottom line is this: when they charged me with carrying a loaded weapon with intent to do harm. Okay, first of all, I was not carrying it. It was in a lockbox. It was not loaded. That's a whole nother story. That's how New York City considers carrying a loaded weapon. If you have a gun, you're carrying it. If you have ammunition, they say it's loaded. It's crazy, I know. But the last one's the most important: with intent to do harm. Why did they do that? Why did they charge me up? Because this is what they do to everybody. In other words, they charge you with crimes that are much worse than they could possibly prove, so you will plead to the lesser crime. This is a grave injustice, right? This is what they did to the general, right? Who got railroaded. This is what they do to people like me, who are white guys with connections, right? Luckily, I was able to get a lawyer. I knew the president of the NRA, but this is what they do to people in the inner city every day. They've been practicing this kind of abuse of law enforcement against Americans for a very long time. And so you and I have to be able to have nuanced thinking and say, I don't support rioting. I don't support looting. And no, I don't understand why people would riot and loot. I'm not going to have empathy for those people, but I do understand why people would protest, right? And so we have to have nuance here. I'm going to wrap this whole thing back up in the banner of self-governance. What do I think should happen in the inner cities today? I think they should be self-governing. That's what I think should happen. When people say disband or defund the police departments, here's what I say. That will lead to anarchy and chaos. That will lead to what you're seeing in the new free country of Chaz in Seattle. It's bad. It's not good. There's nothing good that comes out of that. Every place we've ever lowered police protection in the inner city, crime has gone up, death rates have gone up, burglaries, robberies, rapes, homicide, all goes up, right? I'm not willing to do that because I'm against punishing the inner cities. I'm just not in favor of that. About 100 years ago, by the way, law enforcement basically abandoned our inner cities and we watched crime skyrocket. And that's not what I want to do for people in the inner cities. What I want to do is I want to give them the ability to govern themselves. I think that they have some legitimate grievances potentially against the police in the inner cities. And I think what we ought to do, and this goes to my sense of self-governance most generally, is we ought to create smaller police departments. We know our federal government, too big, too unwieldy, too out of control. You can't monitor it. You can't control it. The people have no power in it. It's too big. And I would argue, for example, in New York, when you have an $8 billion budget for the police department in New York City, too big to be centralized. In Los Angeles, which is, by the way, where I come from, the most under-policed metropolitan area in the United States of America, their budget's far too low. Their police are really strained. My mom was a cop when I was growing up. I know the LA Police Department really well. They're now going to cut their budget by $150 million, right? And it's not about disbanding or defunding the police, but why not give inner city Los Angeles their own police department, where they elect their own chief, where they have their own disciplinary procedures, their own oversight, their own rules for engagement. I'm a big believer in self-governance, and nowhere in the United States of America is self-governance more important right now than in our inner cities. Our inner cities are hurting. We cannot save America without saving our inner cities. It's really important that we, on this call, and people like us, can practice nuanced thinking. I don't agree with the riots and the property damage. I don't, not only do I not agree with it, I can't empathize with it. I don't sympathize with it. I think it's wrong. Unequivocally, I'll stand against it. I don't agree with the vilification of law enforcement. Most cops are good people. They're going to be bad apples in every bunch. But I do agree that we need to give folks in the inner city the ability to govern themselves. This idea that they should be controlled by some outside influence that actually now has an $8 billion budget and is policing the suburbs of New York and the inner city of New York, that just doesn't make any sense to me. And it doesn't go along with what we believe about self-governance. So I'm going to go all the way back and I'm going to wrap this all up. The founders put Article 5 in the Constitution as the ultimate exercise of self-governance. They knew that big government gets out of control. And big government means everything, by the way. A city that's too big, a legislature that's too big, a federal government that's too big, a police department that's too big. And they understood that the people needed a means to take back control for themselves. And so in regard to our federal government, they gave us Article 5. And they said, and we know Mason said at the time that he worried that a federal government that became tyrannical would never impose any restrictions on its own tyranny via amendments. And so they gave us the power. By the way, that was drafted by Eldridge Gary. And the term gerrymandering comes from his name. So we got that amendment that gave you and me the power to be self-governed, to stand when other people wouldn't stand, and to say, no, we're going to take the power back for ourselves. And I think there is an existential question facing us as Americans right now is, are we going to take back the power? And I'm really worried about this. I will tell you, my faith is being challenged. My faith in Americans is being challenged more than ever before in my life right now. And it's being challenged by this open the state stuff, because I cannot believe the speed with which we gave up our right to govern ourselves. I cannot believe the breadth of rights that we gave up without a fight. And I can't believe that we're still giving them up. I can't believe that here we are months into this crisis. The majority of the crisis, in my opinion, now proven to be scandalous, a scam. They were wrong. It was untrue. We got a lot of bad information. I cannot believe that we still have states, for example, Indiana, for example, my home state of Texas, where we still have any restrictions at all. This is ridiculous. It's absurd. German studies have shown there's absolutely no difference between countries that have had total lockdowns and countries that have had no lockdowns, states with total lockdowns, states with no lockdown. There's no difference. No difference in the transmission rates, no difference in the death rates. A lot of this stuff has just been straight up wrong. And I worry that people won't and haven't risen up in a strong enough rebellion. We saw hundreds of people go out to protest, not thousands, not tens of thousands. We saw hundreds of businesses across the country open in contravention of these orders, and most of them got crushed by local governing authorities immediately. And we didn't have hundreds of others or thousands of others stand with them. If we wanted to be able to stand and open our businesses, everybody needed to do it at once, and then there's nothing they can do. Because governing in our country is not done by force. It requires the consent of the governed. And we are going to make a choice, and we are making a choice right now. And this is where we are at in our history. Will we govern ourselves? Do we continue to give our consent to the federal government, to the state governments, to these local governments when they do things that are straight up tyrannical, when they do things that are clearly factually wrong or based on improper facts? We are at a crux moment in the fight for self-governance. And one of the reasons that I come on calls like this, and I'm so glad to be on calls like this, and it's so encouraging for me to be on calls like this, is because those of you who are on this call who lead this charge are warriors in the fight for self-governance. And as long as there are warriors in the fight, even if we're few and far between, or we're the majority, I'll stand with you. And it's my honor to stand with you. And that's why it's my honor to be with you on your summit on this call today. So thanks for having me, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, Mark, thank you very much. Thank you. Enjoyed that very much. Now, just as a reminder, those of you that would like to ask a question or submit a question, then just if you want to ask it, you raise your hand. Now, Rick is going to kind of monitor those. And Rick, I think we have some, right?
Yes.
So you want to, let's get started on it here.
Okay, well, we've got some from the live stream. Let me go ahead and get a couple of those out of the way, and then we'll come back into the Zoom here. The first question we've got here is, did you see General Michael Flynn's recent letter about self-governance, calling for more citizen participation in government? What do you think the average citizen should do and can do to make the biggest difference besides voting?
So of course, voting is the base level citizen participation, but I think each of us has an important role to play. One is, this sounds really simple, but most people don't do it. Go to your city council meetings. Go to your county board of supervisor meetings. I've been to mine. Nobody goes. There's literally almost nobody at them. I've been to city council meetings and county board meetings where I'm the only citizen who is there. Michael Quinn Sullivan, who's a good friend of mine, runs Empower Texans, and he tells a story of how he got into politics. And he was a reporter, and he was not a politics reporter, he was a crime reporter, and he got assigned to cover the city council meeting. And he went to the city council meeting. He was not happy about being forced to be there. He was the only citizen there. And he was appalled because he said he saw horrifying things that nobody knew about. And so I would say the very first step is just look at the schedule, make time. And now it's easy because they're all being done by Zoom or some other digital meeting. Attend them, watch them, pay attention. I guarantee you, if you do, you'll be pissed off. You won't like what you see. There's lots of bad stuff going on, but we need to participate at the most basic level of our republic, and that is in city council and county board meetings, and then be inspired. Run for one of those positions, because it's not that hard to win a spot on your city council or your county board. And then you are now a participant in this great experiment of our democracy, our democratic republic.
I have to admit, I've never attended a city council meeting here, so I made note of that one. Very good, very good. Rick, you got another one?
Yes, we do. Mark, this question is being a Convention of States supporter exercising self-governance, and do you see the Convention of States basics, that is problem, solution, plan, changing in any way?
Well, so yes, it is. And you guys are actually changing the plan all the time, in the sense that the past states lead the way. This is something that, I'll be honest with you, I didn't envision, I didn't even know how to think about it past calling for the Convention of States. So Indiana is a great example of a state that obviously back in 2016, you guys passed the resolution. You were the 6th state to do so. And so you were kind of on the leading edge of all of this. And then you continued to work. And I think this is really the important thing about Convention of States, is it's an exercise in self-governance because of the convention, but it's also a mechanism for recruiting people into the political process, into the self-governance process. One of the important things to remember about activism is that in order to get activists into the political fight, you have to have a fight to call them to. If my call on my podcast or wherever, or Facebook or whatever was, hey, you should be an activist because it's just awesome. That's a bad reason. And that's not compelling. Tell people, oh, you should get engaged in politics because you just should, or we're going to lose the country. That's not compelling. So what Convention of States provides, other than something that I think is really fundamentally important on its own, is it provides a mechanism to recruit people into politics who might not have ever been in politics before. And why is Convention of States so good at that? Because we are working locally to do something nationally. And mostly people watch on television, they watch national news, they're not watching local news. They're thinking, God, DC is so bad and there's nothing we can do about it. And I hate those guys and I wish there was some. Well, and then we give them an answer to that problem, right? The problem and the solution. And so I think what we're doing is we create a framework for bringing in activists, and then your job is to engage those activists in that, and then find out what else is important in Indiana and engage them in that. In Texas last year, what we got engaged in here, the COS Texas, was a fight to lower property taxes. That's what was most important to our activists here in Texas. So I think in Indiana, it's whatever is most important to you. I do think it is exercising self-governance to be involved, but I don't think it can end with Convention of States.
Okay, excellent. I really like that question because, Mark, I think what's happening now, at least in my mind, is that we're bringing the basics of Convention of States together with the concept of self-governance. And I think, in my mind at least, the two are beginning to melt together, and I think it's becoming clearer and clearer. So that was a good that was my question, by the way. So I like that. Thank you for that answer, Rick. Who else we got? Any more?
Okay, we have one. This is from Tim on the live stream. Do you believe that the quote armed guards unquote at the Seattle 6-block area are violating people's civil rights by stopping them and asking questions before allowing them inside?
Good question. Good question. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't only believe that they are, it's just a fact that they are. There is no authority for a private citizen to stop somebody at a checkpoint and demand their ID. That's just straight up against the law. It's a violation not only of civil rights, but I'm sure many other laws. And it's outrageous. And here's why I think it's the most outrageous. By the way, I want you to be clear, in Washington state, they have the absolute right to carry those rifles that they're carrying openly, the way they're carrying. So open carry, legal there. Amazing in a leftist state, right? Shows you that there is still Eastern Washington, which in Eastern Washington, very conservative place. But here's the problem. So we've got these guys there carrying rifles around, enforcing laws that don't exist, not laws of the United States, acting like thugs, scaring the heck out of people. It's unconstitutional, and it's also just straight up illegal. But what bothers me about it more than that is the narrative difference from the left in the mainstream media. I'm being redundant, obviously, when I say the left and the mainstream media. But what bothers me is the idea that when you saw protesters in Michigan carrying ARs across their backs or slung across their fronts, bullet belts across them, those people were terrorists, according to the radical left, according to the media. They were horrible people that we needed to shut it down. They were scaring people. Now, I want you to know, I'm against open carry like that. I understand you have the legal right to do so, and I support people's legal right to do that. My parents have always told me just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think that applies here. I think it's bad for the narrative. I think it's bad optics. But the left went crazy on those people in Michigan that did it. There were 3 or 4 guys doing it. And it's no problem, apparently, in Seattle when they're actually threatening people. One of the guys with guns, this rapper, Raz Simone, was telling people, we're the police and we're going to blow your brains out if you don't do what we say. So I think it's illegal. I think it's unconstitutional. But I think you should pay attention to the 2 different narratives. And that narrative difference is a real problem in America today.
All right. All right. All right. What's next, Rick?
This is from Carol on the live stream. What is the current status of Open the States?
So Open the States, just so you guys know how that came about, I saw a need because these were activists just like me all over the country that were organizing the way that I did back in the early days of the Tea Party movement, organically, spontaneously. I was really worried about them being censored by Facebook, which ultimately happened. And that's why we started the Open the States platform, so that I knew there was a place they could go, organize their meetings, organize their protests, not get censored. And it's still needed. And I think this is one of my great frustrations right now. Our people are suffering greatly from the concept of keeping the states closed still today. In Indiana, you're not open. Your restaurants at 75%, your salons at limited capacity, gyms at limited capacity. This is true all over the country. Almost no states are fully free at this point. There are 5 states that never went into complete lockdown. The leader among them, South Dakota, never locked down at all, and they're still not locked down. But even Florida, we hear Florida is the best of the states. Ron DeSantis. I was on the phone yesterday with activists in Florida and their lawyer. They were arrested for sitting on the beach in Florida with a sign that says, "I am free." In America, really? And thrown in jail overnight, charged with resisting arrest. I mean, just outrageous stuff going on in Florida, which is allegedly the best governor. And I like Ron DeSantis, but he's given his municipalities the authorities to do this stuff. So Open the States is still alive and active. I'm still trying to champion the cause of opening the states. Unfortunately, it's been largely overshadowed right now by the riots and the looting.
Okay. All right. What else we got, Rick?
Well, that kind of leads into our next question here a little bit. This person wants to know, what were the results of the recent Convention of States survey about using the National Guard where protests become rioting?
I don't have the numbers right up in front of me, but it was over 90%. It might have even been as high as 98% of people thought that the National Guard should and could be called in appropriately. And I absolutely think it's appropriate and legal. And we talked about this a little bit with leadership before we came on this call. Optics matter a lot. And it's important that we always remember this. We as individual activists, right? When stuff comes out of your mouth, just because it's true doesn't mean you should say it if you're trying to accomplish something. Sometimes we have to be really careful about how things look, how things sound, because we have an objective we're trying to accomplish. In my case, it's just broader self-governance. And so one of the problems with bringing in the National Guard in places is, unless that's being requested by the people of the state, unless it's being requested by the governor or mayors or whoever has the authority to request it in a particular locality, it just looks like the imposition of federal will on local people. And I don't think that's a good idea, whether the president has the authority or not. I think under the Insurrection Act, the president widely has the authority, but I think the optics and the narrative matter a lot, because what we're trying to do is win a broader battle. And we've got to make sure that this is done carefully with an eye on the optics.
Okay. All right. All right. Rick, got another one?
Yes, we have several, honestly. Mark, just so you know that everybody's in the Zoom here is one of the Indiana Convention of States leaders. And so I'd like to come back into the Zoom right now and ask if anyone in the Zoom nobody has a hand up, but is there anybody in the Zoom call that has a question? If not, I'll go back to the list.
You know, I see a bunch in the chat. If you want me to go there, I can answer a bunch of these.
I have one, Rick.
Sure, go ahead.
Mark, based on the president's recent declaring certain groups as terrorist groups, is there any actions that can be taken against the likes of George Soros and those like him that fund these groups?
Well, I think it's possible, but I want to back up one step from there. The actual declaration of Antifa as a terrorist group has not taken place yet. And I'm actually pretty concerned about that happening. And here's why. I do think they are a domestic terror group. When the president makes that designation, there are other things that are going to come from that naturally. And this is the most important one. I've been a small business owner on and off most of my life. If they are declared officially a domestic terror organization, all of those businesses that have been destroyed in these riots, if it's deemed to be Antifa's responsibility or they're the proximate cause, none of those losses will be covered by insurance, because everybody's insurance has a clause in it, a rider in it that says it doesn't cover terrorism. So we have to be really careful about doing this. I think sometimes elected officials do things a little too flippantly without thinking through. And I think in this case, I'm worried about that, because there's a lot of insurance losses that are going to be covered right now that need to be covered if we're going to get our economy rolling again. So we have to be really careful. So maybe there needs to be a declaration of that. Maybe the Congress first needs to pass legislation saying that they can't exclude domestic terrorism from their policies. I think they are terrorists. I do think if they are designated terrorists, then giving money to a terrorist group becomes an offense that can be prosecuted. I don't think it can be done retroactively. That's called an ex post facto law. You can't do that. So I think it would just be on a go forward basis. That being said, Soros and people like him are very creative in how funding flows, and they would just fund in a roundabout way. Money's like water. It's always going to find the cracks and it's always going to flow.
All right.
Rick, I sent several messages on the chat here from YouTube.
Yep. Mark, did you want to just look at the chat and pick what you want there?
Yeah, so this one is from Specs. It says, with everything as they are you expecting a second shot heard around the world? And I think what you're referring to is, am I expecting a second American Revolution? And the answer to that is no, but I'm more worried about a second Civil War. And I would argue that we are already engaged in a second Civil War. And, you know, if this were 2 years ago, I would have told you we're engaged in a second Civil War and it hasn't gotten violent yet. The shots haven't been fired, but now it actually is violent. And here's the Civil War. You now have two sides in America with distinctly different views of what America is and what it should be, right? And so you have one side that views America as fundamentally evil. You can trace this, you know, if you want to see the way they look at the world, look at the 19 Project promulgated by the New York Times and other radical liberals, which betrays the actual history of the United States, paints us as founded on racism from the very beginning, founded on slavery from the very beginning, endemically, systemically evil and racist. And that side says that the country needs to be destroyed, that history needs to begin anew. We need to wipe the slate clean and start all over again. And then the other side of this new civil war says America is founded in universal and eternal ideals, the fundamental ideal among which is that all men are created equal. We've never lived up to that. And frankly, we're human beings. We probably never will live up to that perfectly, but we have had a passionate pursuit of that ideal to the tune of a civil war, right? And on to the current day where we're constantly fighting to improve towards that ideal. That's the other side. And people who believe in the goodness of America and the exceptionalism of America. That civil war is ongoing. How violent it becomes, I'm not sure, but I'm surprised right now by the level of violence spilling out onto our streets. And the question is, how long till that becomes more open fighting, or does it become more open fighting? We now live in a time where I think somebody's going to have to win this fight. I spoke to Dennis Prager on my podcast early on, and he said something that was very sobering to me. And he said that somebody is going to have to win. I asked him, what are we going to do to stop the infighting? And he said, we're not. One side is going to have to crush another. That's the only thing that's going to end it. These are two completely incompatible versions of what we see the United States of America is and what we want it to be. And one side or the other is going to win. So I think we are engaged currently in a civil war. I don't like the fact that it's actually breaking out into a violent civil war. It's gone beyond just a philosophical civil war. And I'm not sure where it goes from here, but one side's going to have to win. And I hope it's our side that believes in the goodness of America, the exceptionalism of America. That's certainly my plan.
What do you think's what do we need to do for our side to win?
And so I think there's two things that are really important. One is to stop being reactionary and to be proactive. As conservatives, and I would argue libertarians, we tend to be reactionary. Events happen, the battlefield is set, the narrative is set, and we react to the narrative. And I think that's a terrible mistake. It's how we're wired as conservatives generally. And the reason is because we tend to go about our daily lives, go to work, go to church, coach Little League, whatever we do, and we don't pay attention to all that other stuff unless it sort of flares up and inflames. And so I think being proactive as opposed to reactive is really important. Part of that, a huge part of that, is defining the alternatives or setting the narrative, however you want to say the words. He who defines the narrative has the ultimate political power. In other words, he who says what we're going to fight about is the one who has the power. The left is setting the narrative right now, right? They are saying America is a racist country. And we are forced to say, no, it's not, right? So who sets the narrative? Them or us? They're setting the narrative. I don't believe in allowing our opponents to set the narrative. They say, you are racist. And we say, no, we're not, right? That's a losing place to start. You're starting, in fighters parlance or football parlance, you're starting on your heels. You're leaning backwards in that fight. You're not leaning in. And so I think we need to go the opposite direction. So I'm going to give you a very specific example of this, because this is how I talk about it. If we want to talk about racism in America, let's get real about it. Every city where we're seeing massive rioting and looting is governed by Democrats, 100%, right? Detroit, New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Seattle, governed by Democrats, all of them, Democratic mayor, Democratic city council, which means the police department is under Democratic control and has been for decades, which means if those police departments are racist hellholes, then Democrats are racist, period. Inarguable, unequivocal. I will say, broadly speaking, not every Democrat, but Democratic governance regimes in all of these cities are abject racists. They hate Black people. They like keeping Black people in subjugation. They like to see the kind of stuff that we just saw with George Floyd. Well, if not, then why are these democratically governed cities racist hellholes? Because it's not Republicans. Not Republicans. All right. Here's what I want. Now they have to say, no, we're not racist. We're not racist. We haven't been able to solve these problems so I want to push back And that's a proactive narrative. And I will say that on the radio, and I'll say it in TV, and I'll say it in private conversations. I'll say it on Slack to people. I'm in my Nextdoor app saying that kind of stuff in my Nextdoor app. So the question is, are we going to be proactive or reactive during this civil war? And I think we win by being proactive and not reactive. Second thing that also means, and I'll keep this one short, it means that we acknowledge that there actually are problems. We can't just say, oh no, there's no racism. That's ridiculous. And just walk away from, there are problems of racism. I have Black friends who experience racism. They do get stopped more. There are reasons for it, but it doesn't mean it's okay. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't acknowledge why they feel the way they feel and do our best to address those things. So being proactive, but also being realistic about the problems that do exist in our country. Those are important things if we're going to redefine the narrative and we're going to win the Civil War.
Okay, all right. Anything else from the chat list here? I noticed one here comes from Thomas Schultz. He's one of our region captains, about Washington State has sub bases. I wasn't aware of this, but I guess that does make sense. Whatever's going on in Washington does not spill over to the military bases. Any insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, it theoretically could. I just don't believe the military would allow it. I mean, every military base has a secure perimeter, and those perimeters are guarded and watched both electronically and by human personnel. And I just don't believe that they would let it happen at a military base. Then again, I didn't believe they would let it happen to police stations, and they've abandoned the police station in the 3rd precinct in Seattle. And they've done that in other places as well, including in Minneapolis. So I don't think so. I'm not really worried about it, but it's not implausible.
You know, Mark, you mentioned areas having their own police departments as a matter of self-government. Isn't that the precinct concept? Isn't that supposed to bring the police to the local neighborhood through a precinct?
It is, but here's the problem with that, Dale. In the precincts, they're not self-governing. In other words, their disciplinary rules, their rules of engagement and the way they work in the community are set by a broader police department.
Oh, I see.
The way incidents are reviewed, it's not set in the local precinct. It's set by a broader police department. So I want you to imagine this. And again, I'm going to give the people complaining all benefit of the doubt here. It may not be appropriate, but I'm going to do that for sake of example. If you're in a local precinct, right, and a police officer is accused of wrongdoing, that is not handled there in the community. That's handled at some higher level outside of the community. And all of us have felt this at one point or another. I'll tell you, I had an incident when I was living in Northern California. Guy next to me wanted to open an on-site tasting at his winery, at a vineyard there. And I had little kids and we lived on a windy road and I wasn't happy about it. I thought, you know, there's going to be people getting drunk at the winery, driving on our windy road. And I opposed the issuance of this license. And that was handled locally. We went down to a local board. We debated. He did a great job and I lost. All right. And afterwards, I invited him to come over to my house. We were having a big blackberry jamming festival and I invited him to come over to my house and hang out with me. And he was blown away that I wasn't mad. And I wasn't mad because I got to see the process work out. It was right there in front of me in my local community. I lost fair and square. I was okay with that. If that decision had been made out of the city in Washington, D.C. or in Sacramento, I'd have been pissed off. I'd probably still be mad to this day, right? But because it was handled locally, I got to see it work out. I lost fair and square. By the way, it turned out he was right, just so you guys know. There's no problem. The bottom line is when things are handled locally and we can watch them be handled, we like them even if we don't like the decisions because we do them with our neighbors and they seem more legitimate to us. And I think that's the way that the police need to be handled as well, especially in these areas that have these sensitive problems around policing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, anything else on the list? We got about 5 minutes left in this segment if we need it all. So
well, here I can jump. I see some questions here in the chat that I can answer.
Okay.
Susan Line says, what's Mark's opinion about protesters being allowed to gather without concern of COVID-19, but other citizens' activities are being restricted?
Right.
Okay, so to me, this is one of the most ridiculous, asinine things going on in modern politics. I think that we're so used to politicians having double standards. Now it's triple standards. I mean, this is as bad as I've ever seen in my life. You have politicians who said when we gathered to protest that our businesses were closed and our communities closed, you have politicians who actually accused us of wanting to kill people. They actually said people were going to die because of what we were doing, and we were callous, heartless, disgusting, despicable people because we wanted to gather and protest that, right? Now, then you have them saying that people who are protesting by the tens of thousands, who are screaming and yelling, sweating in the streets, they're somehow okay. We have 1,200 medical professionals, I use that in air quotes because I don't think they should even have licenses anymore, who say that basically, for whatever reason, people are immune to COVID-19 when they go out and protest the killing, the George Floyd killing, and they riot and burn and loot, that's okay, right? And now, by the way, the triple standard is the same people are saying President Trump saying he's going to start his rallies again, people are going to die. And so what I think about it is I think it's really dangerous. And here's why I think it's dangerous. I think we need to be able to listen to the experts. It doesn't mean I think we should always believe them, but I do want to be able to listen to them. And what I want to believe is I want to believe as a thinking citizen that the experts are doing their very best to give us the best information they have without political bias. That's what I want to believe. And I think that's really important for a functioning society. When somebody is an immunologist or a virologist or a doctor, I want to believe that they can give me their opinion on their area of expertise, not filtered through politics, because that allows me to take that information and compare it to other information I gather and make an informed decision. And when the so-called experts or the politicians that are supposed to become experts on these things, everything is so clearly through a political lens, what it makes me do is just say, I'm not going to listen to any of them. They're all a bunch of liars. And I think that's incredibly dangerous for our society. We live in a very complex time. We need experts. We do. We need people who study particular things and become experts in them. But when they politicize their opinions, we've now created a situation. And here's what I fear. This pandemic, by the way, it wasn't that bad. Not near as bad as they said. But what if this pandemic had been more like Ebola, which actually had a much higher transmission rate, had a much higher fatality rate? What if it was something like that? And I worry the next one, the next COVID-20 or whatever you want to call it, is going to be much worse. It's going to have a higher transmission rate. It's going to have a higher death rate. And none of us are going to listen. We're not going to listen to the experts because they lied to us this time. They politicized it this time. It's really bad. The destruction of expert credibility in our society is a terrible thing. And I'm really worried about it.
All right. Okay.
Dave,
Well-
can I ask a question of myself, please?
Yes.
Hey, Mark, I lead what I call a philosophy group, and this question kind of comes from that. The group gets into government and that sort of thing occasionally. If we crave freedom, we must remember that all other people crave the same freedom. And groups of freedom-loving people cannot live together in peace without becoming subservient to laws, rules, and regulations that grant each person the same degree of freedom, while at the same time safeguarding an equal degree of freedom for all of us. Freedom is the gift of civilization made possible by the enforcement of law. Would you have a comment on that, or what I can share with this group?
Well, first of all, I agree with that. And I think this, I live in a weird family. That discussion is a regular discussion in my family. We're having these kinds of discussions in my family all the time. I'm really blessed. My daughter, my parents gave me this gift. We have these kind of discussions. My daughter just graduated from Hillsdale College, so she thinks about this kind of stuff and talks about this kind of stuff. My son, highly intellectual, is in law school at Scalia Law. So Patty and I and the kids and my folks, we sit around and talk about this stuff all the time. And specifically what you just said, we talk about all the time. I think to back that up one step, what I would say to your group is this idea that we all crave freedom, that human beings want to be free. Where does that come from? What is that? Where did that come from? There is an underlying condition. And I think it comes from God. That's my personal belief, That's put into us. Every human being has the desire to be free. No human being is born saying, I would like to be enslaved by other people. I would like to be told what to do all the time. Young children don't really like or enjoy being told what to do. It's good for them, but they don't like it. So I would say this desire to be free, to live free, is given to all human beings by God. That's the precursor condition from my perspective. And then you are correct. What we do is we give up a certain amount of our liberty in order to live in a free society, quote unquote. Free, I put in quotes, because we are limited in our actions in a free society. We voluntarily limit our actions. That free society is under assault right now, because if you don't believe, as a person who believes in freedom, and again, I think we all believe that endemically, inherently, if we don't see that society is operating in a way that all are equally free and all are treated the same under the law, all give up the same amount of right to be free so that we can live in a peaceful society, then why follow any of the rules at all? Why be a rule of law society? And I have to say, if you're a rational person right now, you should be questioning that. And I want to take this again into our current political circumstances and our social circumstances. If you live in the inner city and you believe and you have a life experience that tells you that because you're of a particular color or you live in a particular place, you feel like you're treated in a particular way that's different, then why would you want to live in this society? It's not unreasonable. And so this is why, again, I want to clarify just before I close that. I don't believe in systemic racism. I think that's a ridiculous, asinine concept. There's no place in America where the system is structured to promote racism. Doesn't mean I don't believe there's racism out there. And I think we have to be very strong at this time in our history in our listening skills, in our ability to keep our mouths shut sometimes, even when we're hearing stuff that offends us or we think is untrue, to listen to people, to make sure people are heard, and then to be very careful in how we respond to that stuff. And so I think, just to go back and wrap it in a bow, it's what you're discussing there is one of the ultimate philosophical questions. And it's highly applicable to our society at this time in history.
All right, thanks.
Okay, let's wrap up this segment. I just want to leave it with one comment that I got here from Chris Miller, and he wants you to know that he has a reverse mohawk.
I'm trying to picture that, but it's not good.
There's a lot of us that have that condition. You may have it someday, Mark, but you're not there.
Trust me, the longer I do this politics thing, the more it's happening.
Yeah, that'll contribute to it. Mark, thank you very much for your words and for answering questions. Now, while we got you on camera here, we have a couple of challenge coins to issue here. I also want to bring Rodney in here, but I know you've got some strong thoughts about this award, so you want to go ahead and talk about the challenge coin.
Yeah, I do. So for those of you who are in the military, you know what challenge coins are. Officers tend to carry their own challenge coins around, high-ranking officers, and when they meet somebody or at a historic occasion, they tend to give those out in a handshake. That coin is passed in a handshake. It's a military tradition. And we took that tradition and brought it into Convention of States for this reason, because what you do is really important. What grassroots activists do is incredibly important. It is at the root of self-governance. It has always been at the root of self-governance. We can't pay every activist. We can't give every activist the recognition they deserve, but we aspire to. And so sometimes we see activists in Convention of States that are so far and above what anybody can ever be expected to do that they're just heroes, in my opinion. And there can never be enough recognition for heroes, in my opinion. And so what we wanted to do is create a program that was very limited and that was very special. And we minted these challenge coins. What's on the challenge coin, so you see they're a pewter challenge coin. On one side is a portrait of George Mason, obviously the founder of Article 5, the founder of our movement way back when, September 15, 1787. The other side is the original COS logo. Interestingly, we've redesigned the logo since then, so it's really a collector's piece. This is not the first COS logo. each challenge coin comes with a numbered certificate. There are only 300 of them that will ever be minted. The mold has been destroyed by my instruction. I think we're pushing up towards 200 that we've given out now. The challenge coins are issued with the certificate signed by me. And here's another interesting thing, signed by Michael Ferris, the co-founder of Convention of States, my co-founder. Michael's now moved on. He's the president of Alliance Defending Freedom, the largest religious liberties litigation organization in the world. There will never be another challenge coin that looks like this. There will never be more minted. We might come up with another award, but this challenge coin, there's only going to be 300 of them. There will never be certificates signed by the two founders of Convention of States again, because Michael has moved on to other things. Still a big fan, still a great friend of mine, but not part of the Convention of States project. So this is a very special award. And I try to be involved in as many of the presentations I can, because nothing is more important to me in this than you, than the volunteers. And it also comes with a pin. And the reason we invented the pin came later, was because we found people were carrying their challenge coins around with them to show to people. And we wanted them to have something that they could wear in recognition of it. Everywhere I go, every state I go to, whenever I go to the legislature, I go to a grassroots meeting, I end up running across somebody wearing a challenge coin pin. And I know those and I recognize them and I look for them. And to those of you who already have challenge coins, I salute you. It's an incredible honor. To those of you who will be receiving yours today, it's my honor and my privilege to be here with you as you're awarded your challenge coins.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. I don't know if anyone can see it. This is the lapel pin. All right. And this is the actual coin that Mark mentioned there. So the recipients today will be receiving these, as well as along with the certificate. Okay, Rodney, you got some comments you want to make on the challenge coin here?
Well, first I want to say this has been a very important discussion this morning on self-governance. I've been the regional director for the past states since about this time in 2016. And I've been an advocate for self-governance from that point. I don't know if Mark remembers, I had a legislative liaison webinar where we were taught, I presented how we would go for support good liberty legislation in states and to defeat bad legislation in states. And it's been a real struggle, I'd say, to get self-governance going in the past states. What has happened in society in the last, since March, April timeframe here lately, it's kind of woken up the past states, all the states really, but for me especially the past states, and seeing what the local governments are about and what they're doing to us and our society. And we have to be vigilant about self-governance and liberty all the time. And it's kind of a bonus for us, I think, in the past states that people have started to wake up to what local governments can do to us. When we were all, I think, focused on the federal government overreach, we still have that and we still need to get to convention, but we're here for eternity. And the reason we are here for eternity is because of what we're seeing going on right now, and to keep that from ever happening again. And with that, I'll lead into the challenge coins. We have these challenge coins, like Mark said, they're for people that have served with Convention of States for some time, and they've been champions for liberty and in many ways in self-governance. They've kind of moved up to the ranks, some of them in great terms. I think Dale's actually going to do the nomination, the awards in a minute. I want to go through a real quick list here. In Indiana, we've got Jack Dirth was a legislative liaison in Indiana. He's still very engaged with the team. He was awarded a challenge coin. Jerry Rowe is on this summit today. And what a beautiful day it is in the Midwest. I thank everybody for being here on this wonderful day across the Midwest on a Saturday morning. So Jerry Rowe, he's state information analyst, but many of you may have seen him all across the country because he does kind of work at a national level in the information analyst and social media arena. Diane Gomez, she was the state director before Dale Parrish was state director of Indiana, and she now works for the national team. And she was awarded the challenge coin. And then we have Dale Parrish, your own state director, right in front of you, who had received a challenge coin for his extreme efforts in building the team and making everything happen that you're seeing today in the Indiana team. And Paul Phillips was awarded the challenge coin at the 2019 Leadership Summit, along with a bunch of others across the country. Paul's a state director team member and a legislative liaison. And there's more challenge coins to be awarded, and there's probably some on here that will be getting one of these sometime in the near future. So I want to thank everybody for participating in this call today, and this is going to be, it's an honor to be here for these Challenge Coin Awards and to be able to participate with the team. Nothing like being in person. I have been to the Indiana Summit when it was live and in person, so maybe next year we'll be able to do that. So I'll turn that back over to you, Dale, and it's a pleasure being here with everybody.
All right. Thank you very much, Rodney. And yes, we do plan on doing this next year, and we plan on it being in person, but more on that a little bit later. Well, I get the honor here of handing out 2 challenge coins, and I think the best way to do this is I'm going to read to everyone the bio that we submitted on these 2 individuals, because I don't think it can be said any better way than for me just to read the bio that we submitted on these individuals. So the first coin and the first individual then that I want to talk about is Mr. Gary Harbaugh. So Gary, are you there? Yeah, I saw you. I know you're here this time. There you are, Gary. But Gary, we're going to give you a challenge coin. And I want to read the comments here, or the bio that we submitted on Gary. Gary Harbaugh has been a COS leadership volunteer since 2014 and has excelled as he has moved through the leadership positions. Starting as a district captain, Gary displayed his leadership skills by continuing to host the town meeting tradition established by previous district captain. He soon was afforded the opportunity to take on the region captain position for his region. As a region captain, Gary has grown the number of district captains in his region to be the leading region in Indiana. When the decision was made to create 2 co-state directors in Indiana, Gary was a logical choice for one of the positions. As co-state director of operations, Gary manages and coordinates all the district captains and region captains in our state. His excellent district captain recruitment skills that he mastered as a region captain are already deemed successful in his new position. Gary has single-handedly created a new program for our state that will encourage district captain and region captain activity and track the results. And that is the Indiana Mission Excellence Program. The anticipated success of the program will ensure we meet our mission objectives for 2020. Finally, Gary is an avid believer in self-governance and encourages the same for the district captains and region captains he manages. He ran for the Indiana House of Representatives in 2012 and has continued his involvement in the Allen County, Indiana Republican Party. Gary is also an active member of the local chapter of Americans for Prosperity. Gary is certainly one of the individuals worthy of the challenge coin recognition for his past and present contributions and ongoing dedication. Congratulations, Gary.
Thank you, Dale. I'm very humbled, and I appreciate this a lot.
Seeing Gary humble is something odd to see, but no, I'm just kidding. Well, Gary, any other comments you'd like to make, or this is your chance?
Well, I'm exceedingly honored by this award, and I don't have anything else I can really say right now, but thank you.
All right. You're welcome. You're
Hey,
welcome.
Dale, can I add something, please?
Sure.
So, when you see somebody like this get an award like this, what you need to understand is how much effort has gone in on his part and all the different things he's willing to do. And I think the thing that I see that is common among the grassroots activists that end up getting challenge coins is they've pretty much done everything. They've been willing to fulfill whatever job comes open. They do things that might be uncomfortable for them. They're just willing to step up. And so I think what you see here is a great example of that. Congratulations to you on your challenge coin.
Thank you.
Great. Well, we have another coin to give out. And this one is going to Mr. George Ward. I see George. He just blew his nose and he can't believe that I just said his name. So let me read you what we have here on George. George has been a volunteer for Convention of States since 2015 and has earned his reputation as a pillar in the Convention of States Indiana organization. As with many in our organization, George has filled many leadership roles, currently holds a number of positions. He first served as a district captain in Northern Indiana. While a district captain, he also took on the follow-up tool for the state. Additionally, George also took on the role of state grassroots coordinator, which includes being a major component of our district captain training program. As you can see, George has worn many hats and continues to wear numerous hats to this day. I think the role that has garnered much of my appreciation is the role of state grassroots coordinator. As state grassroots coordinator, George is one of the first people new volunteer applicants come in contact with from the leader management tool. First impressions are very important, and George continuously presents a favorable influence. In addition, George seems to maintain a very favorable connection with district captains. He continues to be supportive of our district captains and can commonly be seen manning information tables at county fairs or gun shows, always supporting the district captain. I see George as one of the individuals worthy of the challenge coin recognition for his past and present contributions and ongoing dedication. George, congratulations, my man.
Well, I think you'll appreciate this, Gary. I'm sorry. See what you did to me? I think you'll appreciate this, Dale. I'm really kind of speechless.
That's hard to believe. But
yeah, I think it's quite an honor, and I certainly don't feel deserving of it. I'm just trying to do what needs to be done. But I really appreciate it, especially what you said about our district captains. We talk a lot about our district captains being on the front lines, but that is so true. You know, they're the ones that are out there, you know, meeting the people and arguing for Convention of States and, you know, arguing against the opposition. And it's just simply our duty to support them in that work and keep them inspired and keep them trained. I'm especially honored to be getting this award along with Gary. Gary is a fantastic leader, and he backs me up in a lot of decisions and things that we talk about. I said you found me speechless, but I guess I've blown that, so I'm done. Thank you much. If I don't hang up, I'm going to cry. So
I've never known George to be speechless. I might mention George.
If you don't mind, I'll jump in here. Jump in here real quick. Yeah, I've known George and Gary for quite some time, and I've seen them just take on more and more responsibility all through the years there that I've been the regional director. And it's my hope one day, and Indiana is basically there. There are a couple of states in this case where they don't really have to rely on me a lot. They call on me when needed and communicate with me. And George and Gary are a perfect example of the leaders that are stepping up and taking up the responsibility where they're self-governing in the state and leading and growing the team. I can remember it wasn't that long ago that Indiana was having a little bit of struggle with growing leaders and developing the team and recruiting people. And George and Gary have been instrumental in doing that in Indiana. I thank you guys for everything you've done.
Thanks,
All
Rodney.
right, Rodney. Thank you. Thank you. Paul, I want to give you a chance to make any comment if you would like.
Well, it's tough to say a lot more than what's been said, but I just truly enjoy working with Gary and George. They are dedicated. They're always available, and they're committed to doing this right. And it's just a pleasure being on a team that has such strong leaders and guys who really love liberty.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Well, folks, we're about ready to wrap things up here. Mark, do you have any last comments that you would like to make before we sign off here?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So this is what I would close with, which is we should all constantly try to take time to reflect on who we are and what we're doing. And this is what I mean by that. I think so often when history is happening, we don't realize that we're partaking of history, that we're actually part of history. We tend to think of history as just only backwards looking, but history is being made every day, always, constantly. And we happen to be living, and I think according to a great privilege, in a very historic time. To be alive at a time when what you do actually matters, when the politics really matter, when the way our society is being formed or reformed or torn apart really matters, is a privilege. A life of meaning is a privileged life. And sometimes people have to seek meaning in their lives. I think meaning is being forced upon us at this time in our lives. Serious choices are being made in our society at the local level, but all the way up to the federal level. And you have a role to play in that. I think when we look at our history, we have a tendency to look at the great men and women of history and to think, could I ever be somebody like Patrick Henry or George Washington? My answer is clearly no. The indispensable man, the great orator of the American Revolution, John Adams or Jefferson, the geniuses of the American Revolution. I can't ever imagine even filling one toe worth of those shoes. But I can imagine being Levi Preston. He was a guy who just fought in the American Revolution. He became a captain in the American Revolution. And he fought, in his own words, because self-governance was at stake, because people wanted to tell him what to do, and he believed that they shouldn't be able to. And he believed in liberty, fundamentally. He believed in self-governance, fundamentally. He was willing to put his life on the line for self-governance. And because of men like Captain Levi Preston and their families, and literally since millions of others like him, we have the privilege of engaging in this fight. Don't lament the fight. Don't lament what's happening in your society. Feel privileged for being able to participate in it, because the history will be written. History is always written by the victors. And I hope and I pray and I believe that the history that will be written of the United States of America in this period of time is that we underwent a great convulsion and that we came out of it better than we ever have been. We came out of it more self-governing, more powerful, more unified, and more living up to the principles that form the foundation of this nation than ever before in our history. That's my vision for where we're headed. And I hope that tonight when you go to sleep and that you look in the mirror, that you think, I'm playing a role in the formation of that history. That's how I look at you. That's why it's so important to me when we award these challenge coins, because you guys are heroes in the historic fight for the preservation of liberty. Remember, the pendulum of history swings. It swings back and forth, generally speaking, from really bad tyranny to tyranny, and that's it. It doesn't swing to liberty. This liberty that we are experiencing now in this period in the United States of America, and frankly, all over the planet, is an aberration in human history. Will it continue and will it prevail? Only God knows the answer to that question. But we're given an opportunity to participate in that fight. You personally have chosen to participate in that fight. I think that makes you a hero, simply for choosing to participate, whatever comes of it. Remember, as you participate in the fight, we don't control the result. We only control the fight. We control who we trust, what we do, and what our attitude is about what happens to us. In the long run, that's all we control. But you do control the fight, your willingness to be in the fight. You know, Paul talks in the scripture about running the whole race. That's what I think we have an obligation to do. That's certainly the obligation that I believe is imposed on me. I'm going to run the race. I'm going to run it all the way to my personal finish line. And I hope at the end, they get a pat on the head and somebody says to me, well done, good and faithful servant. I appreciate you guys being in the fight. I hope you'll look at yourselves as the heroes that you are, because that's how I look at you. And always, I'm with you. God bless you guys. And let me know if there's anything I could do to help you.
Mark, thank you very much for being with us today. Really appreciate it. That's pretty much a wrap, folks. Before we sign off, I want to be sure to thank Rick Lyon, our state events coordinator, for putting this together and this summit. And Rick, excellent job, very good job.
Thanks, Dale. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Glad to have you on board. Rick is our first events coordinator for the state, and boy, are we glad to have him on board. So thank you very much. With that, I want to sign off, and I want to thank everyone for the job that you're doing here in Indiana. And we have a great organization here in Indiana, and we're getting stronger and stronger every month that goes by. So I want to thank everyone for the job that they're doing. Next year's summit, believe me, I feel quite positive that we'll be meeting in person next year and be able to shake hands and greet each other. So look forward to that very much so. So with that said, everyone, have a good day. The sun is finally out here. Got some rain this morning, but it looks like it's going to be a nice day. So everyone have a great weekend. And once again, thank you very much for tuning in and participating in our Leadership Summit. So thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Dale. Great job. Great job.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Dale. Great job to everyone. Fantastic.
Thanks to everyone. Good to see you all on.
Sir.
Thank you. Thanks to the challenge coins winners for doing your job.
Oh, hey, what's a man to do, you know?